This podcast is brought to you by the Pacific Neuroscience Institute Foundation. Are you looking to support your memory and optimize your quality of life? Develop a healthy brain for brighter days at PNI's Lifestyle Program, available virtually and in person. Reserve your spot today. Visit pacificlifestyle.org to learn more.
Hello, this is Anthony Effinger. I'm the host of the Think Neuro podcast at the Pacific Neuroscience Institute. And today I'm talking with Dr. David Merrill. He is an adult and geriatric psychiatrist who specializes in amelioration of age-related cognitive deficits, meaning he looks a lot at things that will help us stay sharp as we get older. Dr. Merrill, thanks for joining us.
No, thanks, Anthony. I've been looking forward to it. So I'm the director of the Brain Health Center. We're focused on primary prevention of Alzheimer's and then secondary prevention.
Yeah, and why exercise is so good for cognition, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so listen, I got to tell you, every time I open the New York Times, I see a story about how exercise is absolutely the best thing I can do for my brain. It seems like the thing you study is almost like golden ticket these days. Is that your sense? Is that what's going on here?
Well, it's great. I love that you reference the New York Times because it really has become like the go-to scientific summary source for a lot of people. And I'm glad you look at it. So yes, is a short answer. And I think, in fact, the beautiful part is, I don't know if you've noticed, but each Times article progressively tells you can get away with a shorter and shorter amount of time exercising. So it's kind of like the joke about like 8-minute abs, 6-minute abs, 1 minute. Yeah.
Or down to 30-second abs.
30-second abs works for the brain too.
So is this, so I know they tell us to take these things with a grain of salt, especially when the mainstream media gets a hold of, scientific studies and so forth. But is the Times and other media getting it right about this stuff exercise being, almost a panacea for brain health and staying sharp?
Absolutely. The important thing is, it's a use it or lose it phenomenon. It's been obvious for decades and known. I mean, there was Jack LaLanne, others came up with this idea for skeletal muscles and bodybuilding, to train the body, and the only way to hurt the body is to not use it. And we've understood that for muscles and for bones and even for heart. And it's just finally dawning on us that, the brain rests atop of the body. I mean, it's at the head of the ship, so to speak. And so it's really true. What's good for the heart is good for the brain. And there's just all these, we could spend the next 3 hours talking about all the mechanisms and the ways that exercise helps the body support the brain as we get older, and really hedges your bets in favor of achieving kind of successful aging.
Yeah. So the study I saw most recently was, it talked about how exercise boosts a compound. I'm going to forget the name now, but is it a growth factor in the brain?
Think of brain-derived neurotrophic factor.
That's it.
Right. BDNF.
So tell us about BDNF.
Yeah, it's like so tickled to have you ask me about it. I started studying BDNF before it was popular. I looked before it was in the New York Times. Picture this back in the mid 90s, kicking around the Cal campus. And I was studying development. So there's visual pathways, brain developments. And they have these things called growth factors that when you're born and developing, the brain uses all these growth factors to decide not just which cells, but which connections between which cells are strengthened and survive. And there's one called brain-derived neurotrophic factors, very important for memory centers. There's another one called nerve growth factor. It's very important for attention centers. And it turns out these developmental growth factors that were discovered, decades ago and looked at in their role as in youth and adolescence, turns out these same molecules are critical into adulthood and into older adulthood and support and maintain brain function with aging. And one of the most robust ways they're like miracle grow for the brain, basically.
Miracle grow, like the fertilizer.
BDNF, NGF, there's several other growth factors. One of the most robust ways to get this up in your body is physical exercise.
Amazing. Can we take this term apart for a second? Brain derived. What is that? Why are we saying, why is it called that?
I mean, the honest truth is you really don't want to know why scientists call stuff what they call it. So they took pig brains and they derived the protein out of the pig brain extract. So sorry, see, TMI. But it turns out it works, right? You just think, oh, it's the brain, it's acting in the brain, it's important in the brain. It just happens to be the way that it was initially it's like extracted from pig brains in the lab.
Okay.
It's like they can still call it brain derived because it still works, even if you think, oh, it's the brain cells. So say if two brain cells are connected and communicating, because the brain's electrical chemical. So long distances, the brain communicates through action potentials. It sends an electric signal from one side to the other. But then the points of connection, they're chemical communication. And so we usually think of things like serotonin, dopamine, norepinephrine. Those are antidepressant-related neurotransmitters. Turns out brain-derived neurotrophic factor also acts as a transmitter in strengthening the connections that exist between cells. In other words, strengthening how your brain forms a memory, strengthening how your brain keeps a memory. And that involves BDNF. And I don't know if I completed the story, but anyway, so I was, working on BDNF and development.
Yeah.
Went to grad school, studied it in aging, and we would go through great lengths to get BDNF into the brain, not realizing that we had the power all along. All we had to do was click our heels vigorously for 6 minutes. It's a joke. So all you had to do was exercise.
We're getting down to that. That's the next story I'm going to see in the Times. Go on. So anyway, you just had to figure out how to get this moving. Okay.
Yes, exactly. So scientists have gone through great lengths to, because there's the blood-brain barrier that separates the brain from the body, and BDNF is clunky, it's big. You can't just pop a BDNF pill, it won't get into the brain. But if you exercise, your body produces it brain-derived. It just creates it in the cells and helps keep the cells functional, alive, is strengthened. You think of muscle-mind connection when you're working out, that's BDNF, is connecting, when you get that real good pump in your bicep, that feeling is the BDNF in your head. So it's both strength training and aerobic.
And so this was the Times piece talked about how BDNF was especially good for enhancing memory. And right. you just sort of described why that is.
Right. It's one molecular mechanism underlying memory formation, memory performance. It's interesting because in med school, again, I just lucky. And so I would study for exams doing recumbent biking. I'd be on a recumbent bike and I'd be studying, and that would help me remember. So it turns out what I was probably doing is goosing the system, getting the BDNF going with the exercising, and then try to learn something. And it's easier to remember because.
Were you doing this just by chance because you wanted to stay in shape, or did you have an inkling? You didn't. This was before you knew that this might actually be a way to enhance. That's fascinating.
It just happened, and I've actually had. So I practice clinically. I see a lot of retired professors, especially when I was at full time at the university, and they would make observations some faculty they'll take walking meetings, they'll have discussions going for what they call, I go for a walk in the sands, go walk around. It's you say, I'm going to get the blood pumping. And there certainly is a vascular element of just getting the blood flowing and getting your thinking cap on, so to speak. but it's also the trophic factors and the physical activity that leads to that. And I think people were doing this before we understood it. And now that it's understood, it kind of reinforces positive behavior change.
Yeah. That's the other article I've read, probably in the New York Times, was the walking meeting is another secret to performance.
Yeah. If you can just come up with having walking podcasts, I think.
What we should be walking right now. That is yes. When we do the next one in person, we will go for a walk and do a podcast. I think that's right.
Beautiful. I love it.
So I have two more questions about neurotrophic. Does that mean neuro growth, or what's that word mean?
What does that mean? It has nothing to do with pig brains.
Okay, that's good.
Right. So exactly, we got the brain derived part down, so easy. And then the neurotrophic is like neuro, as in neuron or nerve cell. It's the main basic brain cell of the brain. And then trophic, you're right, it's like supporting. So originally, these were discovered as cell survival factors. So if you deprive brain cells of trophic factors in development, they die. But it turns out even once you're an adult, the trophic factors have another role. They're neuroplasticity factors. So they help the brain learn new things. They help the brain be able to change. For decades, we thought that the brain was fixed and it's like there's no way for it to change and you're just stuck with what you got. But it turns out that's wrong. The brain has a lot of capacity to change and to remold and rewire. And the trophic factors have to do with allowing positive neuroplasticity. So when you're trying to learn something new and you're trying to teach a new trick to, it's the neuroplasticity that allows the strengthening of new connections through the trophic factors. That's one element that's critical for learning and memory.
And then one more thing about the molecule. You said it's clunky.
It's big. It's just big. It's protein.
It's a big protein.
Yeah, so you can't just pop a pill. It just will get stuck. It'll either get digested or stuck in the peripheral nervous system.
No shortcut here with
no shortcut. No, in fact, so my main research mentor in graduate school, his name is Mark Chashinsky. He's a neurologist at UC San Diego, professor, brilliant, does spinal cord injury work where delivering trophic factors to help the spinal column regrow, and then also working on studies to deliver nerve growth factor, now brain-derived neurotrophic, NGF and BDNF, to deliver those into the brain as ways to preserve and protect against neurodegeneration. And so it's obviously a lot more invasive to have a brain surgery to put in BDNF or to put in nerve growth factor. And it can't be a solution for 50 million people worldwide with dementia. But if we can demonstrate that doing this, in fact, stops Alzheimer's, like basically prevents any further progression, maybe even helps ameliorate some symptoms, wouldn't that be something to really demonstrate and show the successful treatment of Alzheimer's using growth factors delivered through human neurosurgery? So it's fascinating work. It's not what I do, but it's part of my training, where I come from.
Certainly. Do you or does anybody else have any theories about why we might be set up so that exercise increases the production and availability of these trophic factors?
Yeah, I'm not an evolutionary biologist, but if you just think back, like sensibly in our evolution and kind of what is the need for the human body to move around in the environment? Well, it's to acquire resources, to get food and shelter and reproduce. And so, obviously these are things that we need to learn how to do. And we need those who've done it successfully and have these brain mechanisms to remember how they did it, survive. And so it's been the idea, I think, would just be to be an evolutionary advantage to have these mechanisms to be able to learn new things. And it's kind of what makes us human. We have this huge forebrain that really our frontal lobes developed in large part because we started living next to rivers and we started eating fish. And the brain is full of good fats like omega-3s, all sorts of DHA, molecules. And so really we moved down by the rivers. Our brains got really big. There's all these trophic factors flying around. here we are on our podcast.
Yeah. Well, I try to get a lot of exercise, and I take some fish oil, and we eat a lot of fish. And at 57 years old, I think, I might have a chance.
You look great. I mean, you look great.
Thanks.
I think it's these jokes of 60 is the new 40 and 50 is the new 30 and all that. So I'm going to be 50 next year. So I'm right there with.
Well, you look great. You look about 40. So I don't know what you're eating, but I want some.
Right.
So it's funny that you mentioned that you were studying on a recumbent bike when you were in school, and now I know at P&I you all are doing a lot of work with people, older people, exercising and doing brain activities at the same time. Is that still happening?
Correct. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So it's really been is a movement, not just in our center, and really it's cross country and global as well. This appreciation of something called dual tasking. We've created our own brain gym on site where people can come and do so-called fit brain training. It's just a catchy, fun way to call it, where essentially what you're doing is the physical activity to start elevating the trophic factors in the brain, in the body. And then while you have that enriched brain state, that the blood is flowing, the trophic factors are up there, you've enhanced the state of neuroplasticity in your brain, then you start putting a cognitive load onto that. So it's a dual task where you start adding in learning some new things. So remember which item to select, or which, if I'm marching in place and then I'm selecting with my hands, it's a lot more fun to actually demonstrate this in the gym. So after we do our walking podcast,
we'll go to the gym.
In the gym, right? So it's basically leveraging what we know about the basic neuroscience to apply it to older adults to help both preserve and protect their memory function through this dual tasking.
And so what are you seeing so far with that?
A lot of help for frontal executive function. So processing speed, complex attention, decision-making. There's more indirect help for working memory. So trying to remember something, lists, names, what you had for dinner, that sort of thing. It's the hardest lift is really to bring back short-term memory recall. That's really hard to train for. That's really hard to preserve. I mean, we are still up against very difficult, devastating condition, but generally, we're seeing a lot of help for those cognitive domains that support memory. So frontal executive function, so our decision-making capacity and how quickly we can decide stuff.
And now a message from our sponsor. The Think Neuro podcast is brought to you by Pacific Neuroscience Institute Foundation, a nonprofit 501c3 organization. If you're inspired by what you hear and wish to support our mission of education through innovation, please visit pacificneuro.org/foundation. So why, tell me, this is, I promise this is the last kind of out there kind of question I'll ask. Why does short-term memory, why is that sort of the first to go and the toughest to restore?
Yeah, no, that's the right question to ask, and it's a great question. I could be devil's advocate and say, "Oh, we just don't know." If I knew that, we'd be talking about my Nobel Prize, right? But in seriousness, short-term memory is complicated. It involves a lot of brain systems, and it includes this seat of memory, the hippocampus, which is these. It's either seahorse shaped or it's shaped like a arena. Is the term hippocampus? The cells in the hippocampus, you need those to be alive and functioning to form short-term memories, and they're exquisitely sensitive to neurodegeneration. So they die off early in Alzheimer's. They start dysfunctioning and die off early in Alzheimer's, like a earliest kind of fallen victim in Alzheimer's disease process. And then they're also just exquisitely sensitive to things like not being oxygenated, not having good blood flow. So we happen to have this Achilles heel, so to speak, this really sensitive part to our memory system that tends to give out. And the really cruel part is dysfunction of short-term memory, it kind of mimics what's quote unquote the normal aging process. So as we get older, you talk about things like senior moment, tip of the tongue phenomenon, like forgetting exactly why you came into the room. These sort of just normal things that like happens to me and you as much as anybody. But could it be the onset of Alzheimer's? Is it something really serious? And understandably, we all get very stressed by that because they kind of mimic each other, especially in the early part. That part of the brain is just very sensitive to malfunction.
God, that's so interesting. And where is the hippocampus roughly, and how big is it?
Yeah, so it's the medial temporal lobes. It's part of a whole structure, a whole system of structures. There's one on both sides of the head. On the left side, you just think of more of the language, and the right side, you think of more of like the arts and stuff like that. But it's on both sides, and it's a size in a cubic millimeters, cubic cc. It's just really tiny. I guess maybe the size of the end of your pinky or something like that. It kind of goes across the head, and it's tiny.
Wow, and this is the thing. There's two,
one on each side,
and this is this critical piece in terms of forming
in memory circuits. So our brain functions on circuits. It's not just single spots. Like, where is memory? Like, well, it's part of a distributed circuit. So the frontal lobe communicates to the middle of the brain, communicates to the deep parts, and back and forth, and vice versa. And kind of all just, I don't mean to be making a crazy symbol with my hand, but it all kind of cycles around.
Yeah.
When there's missing parts of that chain, then it just doesn't work.
And that's the tragedy too. The memory is so interesting from a physiological and anatomical perspective, but it's also, from a philosophical and literary point. I mean, everybody's trying to grapple with memory in so many ways, and I keep reading that the more you recall a memory, the more it becomes modified, which gives me a little bit of vertigo when I think about that. Like, it doesn't, it's not. And so why is that? Do we know why that happens?
Well, I mean, it's really one of these psychology 101 type topics. It's like a whole lecture of like eyewitnesses is the worst sort of testimony, because eyewitnesses, they'll rehearse it, they'll pretend. I mean, they'll kind of like pretend like they're being examined or cross-examined. And the more they do that, the further it deviates from the actual what happened. And so it's a known psychological phenomenon that we're terrible at. Human beings are just really bad at accurately remembering what happens, because of course we want to make sense out of the world. So something might happen one way, but you may want it to have happened some other way, and you can just become increasingly convinced that like, that's my truth, and there you go. And it's just like, okay, like,
that is, oh my gosh, the implications there are incredible. Tell me about the research you did on sitting and the thickness of the cortex in your brain.
Right, yeah. So it's a few years ago now, and it was actually featured in the New York Times as as assistant as assistant professor at the university. It was fun to have that kind of recognition or shout out. But so it was a small study. It's actually one of my early career development award research studies. It was funded by the NIH. And so what we did was we measured not necessarily the size of the hippocampus, but we were looking how thick the layers of the hippocampus are, the cell layers, and so you can look at volume versus thickness, and there's known correlations between thickness and memory performance. And so we were measuring the finding. The kind of headline finding was that prolonged periods of sitting. So volunteers who reported on, and we also tried to track the best we could, people who reported on spending more time sitting, older adults, that was associated with them having thinner memory centers. So sitting too much or more leading to thinner memory centers, and like the thinner it is, the less that it's going to work. It's not a good thing. It was picked up on the news, so to speak.
Yeah,
that was something we were able to add.
So that too is, when you think about the amount that we sit in our society, I mean, that's like a public health emergency almost.
Right. Oh, absolutely. And it's, I'm not coining the term, but these things of like sitting is the new smoking. And, it's now known and understood. Dementia has genetic aspects. There's certainly cases that we still have no clue how to fix or cure or prevent, but upwards of 40% of Alzheimer's cases, dementia cases, could actually be preventable by modifying behaviors. And so
40%.
Sitting is not one of those like easy ones that's there, but all the associated things like physical activity levels and all the lifestyle habits that co-vary with the amount of time sitting absolutely lead to differences in the risk of developing Alzheimer's. So if you think of, there's a reason why our smartwatches and our devices are like, do you want us to ping you when you've been sitting for too long? To get a reminder to get up and move. And that can both be because of negative brain effects of prolonged sitting, but it can also be effects on blood vessels. You think about people taking cross-country or international plane flights, and they end up with blood clots. So there's from sitting too long. So there's really effects on the whole human body. We just were not made to sit still for hours on end. We were made to be running around, jumping around, looking for stuff and doing stuff. And so that helps both our brain, helps our blood vessels, helps our muscles.
Yeah, I mean, we've crammed ourselves into this lifestyle that are all these years of evolution did not prepare us for.
Well, I think so. So you're basically you're going to become the podcaster in the field who's going to change everything. You're going to be doing walking podcasts, and gym podcasts, and cycling podcasts.
I feel guilty now. We should not be sitting here.
Well, I think it's okay to pause and learn about stuff. But then, when we're done, then we'll both go our ways and make sure that we, take a lap around the track, so to speak.
Yeah. You
actually bring a great point, Anthony, which is that there can be a dissociation between, for exercise, it's clear that having high intensity bouts, like 30 seconds of max effort, 30 seconds of rest for 6 minutes, 10 minutes, really great for the brain. That's different than the amount of sedentary time. So in other words, you can't sit for 12 hours a day and then exercise for 6 minutes. You kind of have to address both.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you need to be moving consistently, and then some of your movement needs to be high intensity, and that'll get you your best results.
Well, and lately, the other thing that's, so in the news is walking.
Yeah.
I mean, walking is a miracle. I mean, I've seen 3 articles in the last month. We should all be walking everywhere all the time, basically.
Totally. It's common sense, but it's good to see it borne out by studies and then also reported on, because we forget. It's actually not terribly complicated. You don't need a subscription to do walking. You don't need you don't need a product. Well, you could have shoes, but you can also walk barefoot. I mean, so it's really low cost. It's available to most all. And if you're not able to walk, then, get into rehab or get training. And a lot of older adults, we do recommend a lot of physical therapy for gait and balance training to get people moving again. Because it's really true. There's just really nothing better for the body than moving. And so I'm glad that it's getting reported on and that you're highlighting it as well.
Well, yeah, this is the kind of stuff that, when there's an easy thing out there like this that we've just all been ignoring, I mean, that's kind of low hanging fruit, in a world where there's not a lot of it. Right. I mean, we can only go so far with pharma and all this other stuff. I mean, turns out getting back to basics might be the answer.
Well put.
All right. So final thing, is there anything right now that you see on the horizon that kind of lights you up when you think about, dealing with the patients you see? Is there anything that we should be kind of looking ahead that's twinkling out there?
I think that there's a cool phenomenon that a lot of the underlying mechanisms of benefit, because you were kind of alluding to it with the, fancy pharmacology or space age intervention. A lot of the underlying mechanisms end up being overlapping in terms of brain health. So I mentioned exercise, lifting up trophic factors that enhance neuroplasticity and allow for improvement of memory. Well, that sequence of mechanisms, you could replace the word exercise with any number of interventions and enhancing trophic factors, leading to more neuroplasticity, improving kind of target symptoms of brain function. That really holds across a lot of different paradigms. So I'll give you a couple examples. So psychedelic therapies, it's thought to improve trophic factors, improve windows of neuroplasticity in the brain to allow for change in behavior. Give you another one. So transcranial magnetic stimulation is treatment for depression. Increasing, you're going to guess, trophic factors, improving plasticity, behavior changes in the brain. I'll give you another one. So lithium, controversial, old school.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, lithium. Improves trophic factors, plasticity, positive brain changes, and perhaps at microdoses. There, you can Google it, you can look. If lithium were a new drug, it would be a blockbuster. They have microdose lithium and slow down memory loss in the brain in multiple controlled trials. You know, there's associations of all sorts of positive brain health effects of lithium over decades, but it's not on patent. It's not a new drug. It's a generic. It's cheap as dirt. So are there any, congressional hearings or FDA panels? No, because, it's like walking. They're saying it's not for walking either. You could have that for walking as well.
Well, so just as controversial probably is the psychedelics, right?
Yeah.
I mean, did you say psychedelics like psilocybin that increases neurotrophic factors?
Amongst a whole heck of a lot of other things like changes in the default mode network, and
yes,
it's probably a whole nother podcast. Dr. Kelly, Dr. Heinzerling.
Yeah, no, we've done a couple, but I don't think we've really hit the possible effects on memory and function this way. Right.
So the question will be, what's the right agent? What's the right dosing? Is it ketamine? Is it psilocybin? Is it LSD? Mm-hmm. Is it full dosing? Is it microdosing? Is it a one-off? Is it kind of chronic use? We don't know. These are great experimental questions to ask, questions that deserve to be addressed, to answer, requires funding, requires resources. So it's all just time and effort.
Yeah. Well, it's very much on the minds of people in Oregon where I live, because we have made the regulated, facilitated use of psilocybin legal. And it's kind of become, as you probably know, a national laboratory along with California for obvious reasons, to find out, more.
Right. And it's interesting, not to take away from the psychedelic aspect, but there's also mushrooms. So there's a mushroom lion's mane.
Yeah.
That is both available. You can buy it in the store, cook with it. It's also in supplemental form. So lion's mane, one of the main mechanisms, the way the lion's mane works, I'm going to sound like a broken record. Lion's mane, trophic factors, brain plasticity,
Okay, you know what? Here, this is good news for your podcast host, because I started drinking a lion's mane supplement tea, coffee sort of thing. And I don't know. I like it an awful lot.
Add some curcumin in there, you'd be good to go.
Add some what?
Curcumin.
What's that?
This is a whole nother podcast.
Okay. All right.
No, do you want to know?
Yeah. Spell it. For
curcumin, CUMIN, curcumin.
Okay.
So it's a golden powder. They go into your local coffee shop. Instead of asking for lion's mane, ask for it's turmeric. You may have heard it. So there's
Is it turmeric?
So there's a turmeric plant.
Yeah.
Turmeric plant. Flowers, leaves. In the root, there's curcuminoids that you kind of grind up, and it's used as an Ayurvedic medicine. It's used in both in ancient medicine for centuries or millennia, and then
Yeah.
also used in cooking in dishes and curries. And so curcumin is what we like to call pleiotropic. It has more than one mechanism that benefits the body, including the brain. So it's used for rheumatoid arthritis. It's used for all sorts of malady. It's anti-inflammatory, anti-carcinogenic. It's also anti-amyloid. So it helps treat and prevent Alzheimer's. It's a mild effect, but it's positive nonetheless. Yeah. So you can double up. You can have lion's mane, curcumin. If you really want to go for extra credit, throw in some ashwagandha.
Yeah, I've heard of that. So, okay. I did not know that about lion's mane. That's fascinating. And I've been drinking it as a tea kind of coffee substitute.
So for extra credit, lion's mane, nerve growth factor, the attention and focus, the cholinergic neurons, it promotes nerve growth factor. That's the lion's mane.
Wow. All right. So listen, we got to do this again because we just previewed about 3 more podcasts.
Yeah.
This has been fantastic. I really thank you for this discussion.
It's wonderful. It's wonderful to be here. It's my pleasure anytime.
Oh yeah. No. Like I say, I think we got about 3 more in the bucket after this, but yeah, Dr. Merrill, thank you so much for joining us.
It's my pleasure. Take care. I look forward to talking to you again soon. Watch this. See, I didn't want to. Well, I know you guys can edit it, but I was like so tempted to click my standing desk button and be like, oh my gosh, I gotta stand up. I didn't want to throw a curveball at you.
See, hey, I could do the same thing. Look.
Right. Yeah.
Look how bright my face is now. Jeez.
Right? Just circulation, all the growth factors.
I love it. I can talk about this stuff all day.
Maybe that's like the postscript when you're leaving the theater and that comes on at the end. But then the postscript.